Hello, and welcome back to the Road to 2000. As always, my name is Caleb Denby, and I will be your driver on this journey. Today, the topic of the lecture is going to be about one man, and that man, of course, is the world champion, Magnus Carlsen. Magnus is currently participating in his in a tournament that he helped organize called the Chessable Masters on Chess24. And this is a tournament that had a preliminary stage and then a playoff stage. And in the playoff stage, Magnus found himself on the wrong side of the bracket, sort of. In the first part of the bracket, he had to face Fabiano Caruana in the quarterfinals. And now he's actually just moved on past the semifinals, defeating Liren. So it's tough when your bracket consists of the number 1 player, the number 2 player, and the number 3 player in the world. But Magnus has really proven some dominance, at least in this rapid chess format, online against these two biggest rivals that he's facing currently in today's chess world. So I wanted to focus on some of these games today and really show how Magnus is outplaying these absolutely phenomenal chess players who are better than literally everyone else besides Magnus Carlsen, and just see what kind of mistakes are being made and how the games are progressing. So to start out with, I have a 4-move game. Not often you see a 4-move game by players of this level. Liren had the white pieces, Magnus had black, and the game went c4, e6, g3, queen g5, bishop g2, and now I do believe queen takes d2 was played, and queen takes d2, and then Magnus resigned. This is actually something that happened. This is not a joke, but the reason Magnus Carlsen did this is because Liren actually disconnected in round 1 of their match, and to give him the point back, Magnus Carlsen, being the great sportsman that he is, sacrificed his queen on move 4 and then resigned. So I wanted to include this because it shows how Magnus is, yes, the best chess player in the world right now, but he's also kind of a sportsman at it, which is making it fun to follow these games, makes it easier to cheer for the guy, even when he's playing some of your favorite players. He does stuff like this, showing that he really is here, trying to play chess, trying to prove that this is still about chess, not just about winning the games, winning the money. Why didn't he play bishop takes d2? I don't know, huge mistake from Liren, but queen takes d2 forced resignation, so good enough for me. Okay, with that out of the way, I want to move on to some serious games. We have one here between Fabiano Caruana and Magnus Carlsen. So this, of course, from the quarterfinal match. And I absolutely had to go over this game because even though Fabi lost this game, he played my favorite opening of all time, which is, of course, the F3 Nimzo-Indian. So whenever somebody plays the F3 Nimzo at this top level, I very much want to go over the game, especially if they lose, because then I have to hurriedly, explain away the loss and how it's not the opening's fault, it's not the opening's fault. So let's jump into it here. Fabi plays d4, knight f6, c4, e6, knight c3, bishop b4, arriving at the Nimzo-Indian, pinning the knight to the king. And of course, Fabi plays my favorite line, the F3 Nimzo. This is one that you don't see super often at the top level these days. But honestly, you don't see the Nimzo that often these days. Most of the top players now are choosing to avoid the Nimzo-Indian with a move like knight f3 in this position to get into more standard Queen's Gambit declined theory. However, Fabi, in this case, happy to go for it, playing the F3 Nimzo, and I do think it offers white some really interesting opportunities. Now, just a brief aside on the F3 Nimzo, there are many, many ways to play this. At my level, and I think at most levels that are outside of the 2800 range, I think the move c5 is probably the most testing here for black. It really challenges white's center, forces him to commit to this almost Benoni type of pawn structure, and it is a very good version of the Benoni pawn structure for black, which is why black can often go for this. That being said, a good version of the Benoni pawn structure is still the Benoni pawn structure, so a lot to play for here with white as well. Now you can also play d5 and go into some pretty normal stuff. You can also play crazy moves like castles and go for something like knight e8 and go for this stuff, although it is a bit dubious. But lately, this line has actually also gained in a bit of popularity here. the move bishop, not d6, but bishop e7 rather, is something that is gaining in popularity at the top level these days as well. In this case, Magnus chose none of the above, playing d5, and after a3, just capturing on c3. And now this is also a perfectly playable line for black. In the game, he played c5, and after c takes d5, if he had played e takes d5, we might be heading for some world championship territory, this position actually occurring in his world championship match against Vichy Anand. And while that game did end up going his way, he had a very, very suspicious looking position for a lot of the game, so not one that's repeated often these days. Instead, after c takes d5, Magnus actually plays the move knight takes d5. And this line has a pretty good reputation as being a sort of solid try for black against this f3 Nimzo. Things get liquidated off the board pretty quickly. White, for the moment, is going to actually end up with an extra pawn for a little while, but he very, very rarely is actually able to keep this pawn. And we'll see with good opening play, black is just able to regain the pawn he loses. So how does he lose a pawn here? Well, d takes c5 is simply capturing a pawn. Black's not really interested in taking this guy back, allowing stuff like this, and e4 coming very, very quickly. So queen a5, and now black is so much not interested in taking this guy that white can even play the move e4 here, and he very much does. If black dares to capture on c3, just the move queen d2 is going to be very, very difficult to meet, with a slightly unorthodox pin, but a pin nonetheless on this knight. And if you try a move like queen takes c5, bishop b2, and this knight is actually almost entirely trapped here. If you come back, for example, this is hanging, everything is hanging. So none of this pawn capture business, just knight f6 is one of the main moves, knight e7 being the other move, but knight f6, bishop e3, castles, a4 is a little bit unorthodox, knight fd7, and then if Fabi played the move queen b3 here, he would be transposing into very, very, very much mainline stuff. The idea being, if you capture here, the move queen b4 is going to be quite awkward, because you are more or less obliged to capture this queen, and then white gets some active pawns with some very great bishops, or active bishops with really great pawns, however you want to phrase it. So of course, Magnus would not capture the pawn there. But here, Fabi comes up with a pretty interesting move. Instead of going for queen b3 and the normal stuff, he just plays the move king f2. And this is a pretty interesting idea here. It is very much not preventing knight takes c5, as the queen b3 does in the normal line. And so black is, very well within his rights to just capture this pawn, and he very much does. However, Fabi does have a pretty nice idea here. He plays the move queen d6. And the fact is, this knight doesn't really have many comfortable squares to go to. Now, in the couple games that I could find that had reached this position before, the move knight takes a4 was played. Understandably, Magnus kind of shied away from this in a rapid game. It is rather difficult to start going pawn hunting like this with your knight on the rim of the board, putting yourself into an incredibly awkward pin when you don't have enough time on the clock to really think it through. So Magnus instead plays the move b6, which is totally fine. But now white can actually seize an advantage. Already out of the opening, white is going to be much better if he finds this accurate move here. So guys in the chat room, see if you can find a way to get an advantage in this position. Oh, Fallon, Missouri in the house. Go Cardinals. Well, thank you for watching Sound Groove of America. If you ever want to make the trip down to the chess club, we are open now. We are open. Bishop takes c5. So bishop takes c5 actually isn't going to do it for us. In fact, white might be lucky not to end up worse here with this rook coming into this open file with tempo. This bishop is actually probably going to come to d7 rather than b7, hitting this a4 pawn, and this knight's going to get developed without too much controversy either. So natural development for black is coming very, very quickly. Even a move like bishop a6 is potentially playable. just trading off these guys, and the black queen is going to be more active here. So you need something more concrete than just trading off. Does anybody see it? No? Okay. The move, of course, is the move bishop b5. This is a really powerful move, actually. The point of it is you're interfering with the queen's protection of the knight, so you are very much threatening the move. Bishop takes c5, winning another pawn. Black definitely isn't really interested in going pawn hunting here. White's going to start developing with tempo, and you're going to be finding it very, very difficult to activate your queenside pieces. Same thing goes for a move like knight b to d7, just trying to develop and defend. Moves like bishop c6 are already coming, and this guy is just totally stuck. If you play this move, this guy's hanging, this guy's hanging. It's going to get awkward rather quickly for you. So here, Magnus played perhaps the most natural move, but also a move that definitely gives White perhaps a more serious advantage than he deserved here. Turns out the move bishop b7 might be the best try, with the idea of playing a move like a6 soon. For example, knight e2, a6, and black is starting to kind of fight back against the white pieces here. A move like queen g3 is actually potentially playable with crazy stuff like bishop h6 coming, but this is definitely probably one of the better ways Magnus could have gone here. Understandably, in this slightly unorthodox opening, Magnus did not have all of this prepped and chose bishop d7 instead, which is a much more concrete approach, just trying to solve the problem of the bishop rather immediately. And I think this is a very human approach. You just try to get out of the issue the most direct way possible. And I think this is a great way of playing if you find yourself in an uncomfortable position where none of your pieces can really move. This is going to become a bit of a theme with the games tonight. When you find yourself in these uncomfortable positions where you can't really move, can't really develop, you shouldn't be afraid to sometimes give away material, give away material, specifically a pawn, in order to free the pieces. And in fact, bishop d7 is going to end up sacrificing a pawn in the ensuing line. The move knight e2 is played next, and now Magnus goes ahead and plays the move bishop takes b5. And while if white plays totally accurately here, white does end up with a significant advantage. If white doesn't play entirely accurately, as we see happen in the game, then black's pieces are finally going to be free to be able to breathe a little bit, be able to move around a little bit, and that's really what you need to get back into a game like this. You can kind of contrast what happened in the game: bishop takes b5, bishop takes c5, b takes c5, and then queen takes c5, knight d7, queen b5, queen c7. So you can kind of contrast a position like this. I know I played through those moves rather quickly. They were pretty forcing captures. So a position like this where white is up a pawn, but the black pieces can all move. This is what Magnus chose to go for, versus a position you can imagine like knight fd7, knight e2, bishop b7 isn't even playable, like a6 maybe, bishop c6, rook a7. A position like this, where all the pieces are still on the board, black is not down a pawn, but you see how he just lacks, really any kind of coherent coordination. A position like this is much more likely to just totally collapse and totally fall apart in a practical game versus a position like Magnus got, where he is down a pawn, but he has active pieces to at least be going in his favor. So that's the practical lesson to take away, I think, from this opening play, is Magnus quick to sacrifice a pawn rather than play a kind of miserable position with even material. So bishop b5, bishop c5 was the intermezzo by Fabi, hitting the rook on f8. So b takes c5 is forced. Now queen takes c5 is another nice intermezzo, pinning the bishop to the queen, knight d7, and then Fabi captures on b5 with the queen. And it does turn out that the move a takes b5 would have been rather powerful for Fabi, connecting the two pawns, making that extra pawn a little bit more felt. The idea that queen takes a1 is going to be met with queen takes f8, and no major pieces are going to be lost here for white. But a takes b5 was missed, queen b5 played instead, and now after queen c7, Magnus kind of gets something he was hoping for. And I'm not even sure that white can seriously claim to be much better here at all. As we'll see in the game, he has some very practical difficulties. with specifically this king. And this extra pawn sitting on c3 is not really going to be felt in this exact position. What would happen after a6 directly? Well, let's go back and take a quick look. If a6 directly, I think this is a playable move. I think somehow, some way, there's some crazy business involving the move knight e2. And if this piece gets captured, then this piece gets captured. And if this piece gets captured, then this piece gets captured. And all of a sudden, the rooks are connected, and you have an issue on the a8 square. So some funny tactics like this, but after this, maybe bishop b7, and then you end up with similar stuff with crazy queen g3 business, bishop back to d3 also potentially being playable. I think it transposes in most cases, to be honest, just to bishop b7 first. Good question, though. Moving along, rook h to d1 is the natural move by Fabi, getting the rook out of the corner, allowing this king to step back to the first rank. And now simply knight e5 by Magnus, stepping off of the square where the knight was attacked, getting the knight to active squares, looking to just activate the pieces. And this is how you should play, of course, with active pieces when you're down material. You don't need to immediately try and regain this material kind of at any cost. It's more just about getting your pieces into the game, getting them to good squares like e5, like c4, and taking your time with it. It's not all about the material. A lot of it is just about finding squares for your pieces. Rather than let this knight sit on the e5 square, Fabi actually chose to push f4, which has a lot of upsides, but unfortunately has a lot of downsides as well. We'll see now that in addition to having pressure on white's extra pawn, white is really going to struggle with this king, and Magnus is quick to take advantage of that. He plays the move knight g4 check, and Fabi comes up to king f3. Now, it was possible to play a move like h5 and sort of leave this knight here, but Magnus decided that this knight would be better suited attacking the newly weakened e4 square from f6. Now queen e5 was played in the game, queen e7 is Magnus Carlsen's choice, and rook up to d4 is very, very natural by Fabi, just preparing to double, solidifying the e4 square as well. The rook comes over to c8, still all about piece activity here for black. Rook b1, rook f d8 gets the final piece into the position. Takes queen d4. Now, of course, as black, you're down a pawn. You have the safer king, not interested in trading these queens off. This, I think, might be just strictly losing. So queen c7 instead. And once again, you see how there's just these soft points in the white camp. And Magnus isn't breaking through on these soft points immediately, but he is just applying pressure. Just applying pressure to each and every one of these squares and making white sort of play around them. You know, if white wants to make any type of progress, he's going to have to always keep an eye on all of these weak squares that black is targeting. The move rook d1 was played in the game. Notably, this knight is tied down to the defense. This queen, tied down to the defense, sort of only leaves this rook left over to move around freely. So rook d1. And now, once again, Magnus doesn't go crazy, doesn't get impatient being down the pawn. He plays a simple improving move, h6. You know, it's this type of patience that really ends up winning Magnus this game. You know, it's not about immediately regaining the material. It's not about going for things like queen a5, trying to break through with things like this. It's not about trying to play crazy moves like g5, trying to get at the king. It's about playing simple, improving chess, and relying on your position to sort of take care of itself. In the game, Fabi actually goes a little bit wild and plays the move g4. And Magnus plays the slightly strange-looking rook e8, perhaps aiming for some e5 ideas. Once again, taking a look at the squares that Fabi weakened with g4 and trying to take advantage of them with a move like e5. Queen d6 was played in the game, and now queen c4. You know, sort of as soon as Fabi abandons the defense of one of these weak points, this is when Magnus steps in to apply more pressure here, sort of remind Fabi that, hey, you know, you want to try to get active, well, keep an eye on all these weaknesses that you made. And so Fabi very quickly adjusts his queen back to this back to the b4 square rather than the d4 square, but still in a very defensive position, just guarding the weak squares. Queen c8 was played by Magnus, and knight g3 was Fabi's choice, going for some stuff on the king side. And now Magnus takes his opportunity to play the move e5. E5 more or less forces white to play the move f5. If you just ignore it, of course I'm going to take this, and now this king is really looking dire. So f5 played in the game. And now from here, Magnus actually plays the move rook d8, offering up another rook trade. And this goes to show you, once again, how patient Magnus is and how unafraid of the extra pawn he is. In a position like this, the extra pawn really doesn't matter. And that's kind of the story of this game. Now, let me paint you a very different picture where black wastes 2 tempi, and this pawn lands on c5. Now, all of a sudden, the extra pawn very, very much does matter. And this is sort of the point of the whole game, is when your pawn's on c3, it's not a very useful extra pawn. When the pawn's on c5, that's when your opponent has to start really, really being careful. This third rank versus the fifth rank makes a huge, huge difference. So if you find yourself playing with the extra material, you should very much strive to get this pawn up the board as quickly as you can, so that it can be making tangible threats in the position. Now, we saw white's pieces being tied down to weaknesses around the king that were made, but as soon as this pawn reaches a square like the fifth rank, now it's going to be black's pieces tied down, making sure this pawn doesn't advance even further and become an unstoppable queen. So that's the lesson of this game, is 1, this patience that Magnus is showing, just keeping an eye on weaknesses, not rushing things, trying to win the material back, and 2, when your extra pawn is so far back, it is still an extra pawn, but it's not going to contribute to the game unless eventually you can get it to roll up the board. So rook d8 played in the game, offering a trade of the rooks, which Fabi accepts, but now the point is these squares become pretty much impossible to defend. Turns out the move queen b1 would have been fine for Fabi, keeping an eye on these 2 squares exactly. But it's not good for any more than equality, unfortunately. Moves like queen c4, I think, also get the job done, just coming back to a square like e2. But in the game, Fabi just blunders with the move king e2. And now, with this one simple mistake by Fabi, Magnus has been playing more or less perfect chess since getting that slight disadvantage out of the opening. And now Magnus seizes the advantage the second the opportunity is offered, and goes on to win this game pretty cleanly. So king e2, of course, drops this pawn on g4, which Magnus, of course, captures. Knight f1 was Fabi's choice, and now I'd like you to try and find try and find black's next move. It's a very, very clever move, and I'll be very impressed if you guys do end up finding the move that Magnus played here. It is actually just the best move by far, and it's definitely not one that would have come to my mind at first glance. So white to move and get a significant advantage. So everybody and their grandmother would play the move queen h4 here, right? Of course, you're attacking these dark squares, you're attacking h2, and you're threatening to just invade. But, of course, there is the subtlety where queen b8 check and queen takes a7 is defending f2, as well as clearing the path for an a pawn, winning yet another pawn for white. And while black might be doing okay here, black is definitely not going to win this position without this pawn. So that's why Magnus plays the move a5, says, hey, how about you move that queen? And once Fabi does, of course, now queen h4 is coming through with devastating effect. If queen c5 were played instead, trying to guard some of these squares, still queen h4 is going to be very, very strong. And now if queen takes a5, it's less good than queen takes a7, because queen f2 check is going to be brutal. And if white, doesn't take the bait, plays a move like c4, Queen h5 is going to be really strong. I think knight f6 should be pretty strong as well, hitting e4, even a move like king h7. And white is almost completely in zugzwang. In the game, though, queen b5 and now queen h4 is just devastating. Knight d2 was played, and queen takes h2 with check comes on the board. King d3, queen g3 with check, king c2, knight e3 with check, king b3, queen e1 is just corralling this king now all the way on the queen side. Queen d3 was played to protect. Queen d1 check now comes on the board. King a2, queen takes a4 check. King b2 played in the game. And I do remember there was a very, very funny line shown on the live stream here that went knight d1 check, king b1, and then I'd like you guys to find white to move and win. It's a bit unnecessary, but it is pretty fun. Note that knight d1 check didn't actually happen in the game, but would have been fun if it did. How could Fabi blunder like that? Time trouble? I don't think he was in super severe time trouble. He might have been a little bit low on time. I don't actually recall the exact time clock. Black to move? Yeah, not black to move. I'm sorry if I was saying the wrong thing. Yeah, so queen b5. Queen b5 is the funny way to do it. Of course, like everything is winning here, but queen b5 is the funny way to do it. But unfortunately, the move queen c2 or king c2 does exist. If queen takes b5 was forced, then this would be the funniest. But king c2, you can just take on d3, play a4, and this endgame is just quite clearly going to be winning. King c2 just means a move like knight e3 check, and with both rook pawns running up the board, white very much does not stand a chance here. So this didn't happen in the game, unfortunately, but knight g4 was played instead, knight b3, and now black is just up too many pawns. Queen e7, more checks, and the a pawn starts running up the board. Queen a4 check was enough for resignation, with a2 and a1 pretty much being unstoppable to follow. So this was a really interesting game by Magnus Carlsen, and it shows what Magnus can do when he's on form. You know, it almost doesn't matter that Fabi got such a good position out of the opening, had the chance for such an advantage, because Magnus, quite frankly, just sort of outplayed him from that middle game position. You know, Fabi was trying various things, starting to push some pawns, but it turned out that he was just over-pressing, because Magnus's position was active, he was patient, he had good pieces, and that's all you really need in a chess game like this. So notes to take away: note how frankly useless this c3 pawn was to white, how the only way it's ever going to be relevant is if it manages to march up the board. I can't find this game. Yeah, I'm pretty sure this one was from their quarterfinal match, but maybe it was somehow from the preliminary stage. I don't know. Regardless, it's the f3 Nimzo. Had to go over it. Points to take away: this pawn, useless on c3, incredibly useful on c5. I'm not saying Fabi missed an opportunity to push this pawn up the board, but as a general rule of thumb, with extra pawns, keep this in mind. The further back they are, the less important they are. And sometimes you'll see that in positions where somebody has plucked off an h-pawn, it almost becomes kind of irrelevant in a lot of the positions, because often the counterpart is sitting on h2, not doing too much at all. Other things to keep in mind: when you're down material in a situation like this, it's not necessarily all about regaining that material. It's just about keeping your pieces happy, making sure they stay active, making sure they all have useful roles, and then that's quite often enough to have decent compensation, as in this game. Rapid ratings instead of the classical ones. These are the ratings that Lichess throws up, so that's what I used as well. Anyways, moving along, I wanted to take a look now at a game from the semifinal match that just concluded today that Magnus played against Liren. So, you know, world number 2 out of the way, crushed him in the quarterfinals, now on to the world number 3. And this is Magnus up against Liren. So let's jump into it here. We had c4, e5, g3, d5, and this is already a bit unusual by Magnus. Much more common is knight f6, bishop g2, d5, cd5, and now knight d5. The point being we play knight f6 first to be able to recapture with the knight, and then after knight c3, this knight comes back to b6. So rather than go for this mainline stuff, we had d5, queen takes d5, knight f3, knight c6, knight c3, queen back to d8. And while it looks as though black is sort of just wasting extra time moving this queen out and back, if you compare these positions, this is the main line, this is the position Magnus got. So once again, main line, position he got. It turns out it's not so different after all, right? White developed a knight instead of a bishop, and that's kind of all the time that, that black actually lost here. So not a ridiculous idea out of the opening for Magnus. The main difference is this knight's going to be on f6 now rather than b6. There are some upsides to this. There are also some downsides to this that we'll see. Liren actually tries to take advantage of them, but it doesn't end up really making a difference here for Ding. So kingside castles by white. We have now h6 by black, and this is one of those key differences that I wanted to highlight. Quite often in this main line, which I'm going to jump back to once again, you'll actually see the move f6 getting played eventually. For example, let me just play some moves. a3, castles, b4, bishop e6, rook b1, and f6. This is a position that's been reached over 1,000 times. This is sort of the structure that black aims for, supporting the e5 pawn with this f6 push, giving this bishop a square back on f7, and keeping these bishops kind of cagily placed behind the e pawn, looking out, peeking out at the board. And so, of course, that structure is not going to be possible with this knight on f6, so you see this pawn come to h6 instead, because controlling the g5 square really is going to be critical here. Now we see the move d3, and we arrive at another difference from the main line that the world champion plays. Rather than bring this bishop out to e7, it is in this case going to be much better placed on the d6 square. So who knows why the bishop on d6 is better than the bishop on e7, thanks to the difference in the opening line. Can you guys in the chat figure this one out? Why is d5 unusual? Well, it's unusual because this queen d5, queen d8 line is not very well known. It's pretty counterintuitive to bring the queen out and then bring it directly back right away. Joe Bruin does not know why. So in the alternate line, I promise I'll stop skipping back and forth pretty soon. In the alternate line, we have, of course, this pawn coming to f6 to defend the e5 pawn. So we never really have to worry about the e5 pawn because the pawn is always defending it. Now, in this line, of course, we don't have this luxury, so we do actually have to give our e5 pawn some consideration here, which is why the bishop comes out to d6, just providing some extra support to the e5 pawn, compensating for the fact that f6 is no longer a serious option here for black. Now the pawn comes out to a3, and we see another difference from the main line. Here, rather than allow b4, Magnus does actually take the time to play the move a5. And I think this is probably a good decision here by Magnus. Notably, if he did not do this and simply castled, this pawn comes to b4. If you play a simple move like bishop b6, already actually you're running into quite a bit of trouble with a move like b5 and bishop b2 to follow. The point being, this guy is suddenly becoming quite difficult to defend, and you might find yourself wanting to play moves like knight d7 and b6, which if that's the case, you likely should have spent these tempi earlier on in the opening when you could have done it for free. So because of that, Magnus, I believe, plays the move a5, hampering the b4 break. And while Memento Mori has typed out a whole plethora of reasons why the bishop belongs on d6, and most of them I think are quite true. It does also leave the e file open, which is the main addition that he was saying that I failed to mention, And because the e-file is left more open, moves like knight d4 do come a little bit easier. In the game now, Liren chose a slightly more cautious approach, a slightly more slower approach to the position, but due to Black's opening play, he has, all these advantages having this bishop on d6, opening the e-file, allowing this knight to potentially jump to d4, but they weren't free. They definitely weren't free. So who sees some potential ideas here for white? The move b3 was played in the game, and I'm not going to argue that b3 is a bad move. I think b3 is a perfectly fine move. It was potentially maybe even the best move, but it doesn't really aim to punish Black's opening play, per se. Well, this isn't quite the same as the Scandinavian line, Lorenzo. It's pretty different when you arrive from the English. Chessbase Arabia says bishop d2, knight b5, and b4. Jarda says knight b5. Issa and Santaslayer both say the move d4. So in this specific case, the move I was fishing for was in fact this move d4. This highlights the fact that this bishop went to d6 rather than e7. Of course, on d6, it leaves the e-file open, but on e7, it left the d-file open. So this is sort of a unique opportunity that white generally doesn't get in this opening this early on, this opportunity to play d4. And if white can achieve d4, very often white should be playing the move d4. And the game might continue with a series of captures and kingside castles, and then white might just have a comfortable position after a move like rook d1, where Black is sort of feeling the pressure of the white major pieces on this open file. Other things the chat room was saying include the move knight b5, bishop d2, and b4. And I'm not a huge fan of this bishop b2 and bishop d2 and b4 idea. To be totally honest, I think that opening the a-file may actually tend to favor Black in this position, but the move knight b5 is very, very relevant, and I think it's a very, very important idea for white in this position, and we'll see that come into play a little bit later on. And the reason knight b5 is so important isn't so much because it opens up this diagonal, but more so, yes, it attacks this bishop on d6, but more importantly, it defends the d4 square. And we'll see that this opening line does often turn out to be all about the d4 square. b3 played in the game, castles, as I was saying, bishop b2 now, and rook e8. So Magnus is making use of this e-file to the fullest extent. Now, rook c1 was played in the game, and I think this is a perfectly fine move. This move is actually, for the moment, preventing the move knight d4, I believe, because takes, and knight b5 is likely just going to be strong with all of the white pieces sort of coming together a bit too harmoniously. So knight d4 not really on the cards for the moment. Bishop h3 was played instead, and now I do sort of believe that this is where things started to go wrong for Liren. On the surface, this looks like a pretty quiet position with not too many, sort of direct threats coming through on the board immediately, but this is kind of the moment when somebody is going to be declared the victor of the opening. Not necessarily the game, but this is where it's going to be decided who has the better position out of the opening in the next very few moves. And the reason for that is both sides are threatening very concrete ideas, not to win material, but yes, to get a good positional advantage. So is anybody here familiar with these positions, and does anybody here know these positional threats that, that both players are aiming for? Of course, I've talked a bit about ideas for Black. I've talked a bit about ideas for white, but there's one specific idea for white in general that I am hoping you guys will manage to find, and one idea for black as well. That should hopefully already be in your mind. So try and come up with these positional threats that are sort of beginning to appear in the position. Positional threats. It's goodbye to Joe. Goodbye. Who has the positional threats? I get the feeling that Memento Mori is our resident English expert in the chat, so I better know what I'm talking about, because I don't often play this opening line, but I do claim to know a little bit about it. Santa Slayer, I'm not sure what you mean by e5. If you mean this pawn is on e5. Yes, Analyze Your Games will be happening at 8 p.m. Central Time today on Twitch, but we do have one more class in between this one and that one. Mandy says e3, d4 maybe. Beltran says knight b5. GG says knight h4. So you guys have a lot of the ideas. There are some positional features that are really important that you're pointing out. One is, yes, this bishop is a huge benefit to white. White is definitely playing for some long-term pressure with this bishop. And this bishop is actually the reason for black's positional threat that I want to talk about. But that's not really the huge positional idea that white is trying to get through. So let me explain the positional idea that white wants with a variation that I want to show. And then first, let me talk about black's positional idea, because it's a little bit easier to understand. So we do see this bishop kind of bearing down on the queen side, and we do see that the b5 square is a significant hole for black here. So if you imagine that white sort of wastes some time, like h3, queen d7, king h2, now all of a sudden the move knight d4 is the really crucial idea for black that Magnus Carlsen is very much trying to achieve. And the point is, after knight d2, black is now able to solve all of his problems with one move, and that move is c6. And actually, this is exactly how the game variation continued. Magnus Carlsen got all of these moves in, and while on the surface, it might not look like white is doing terribly here, this is in fact going to be practically just a significantly much more comfortable position for black if something isn't done sort of immediately to counteract this setup. This is a huge positional gain for black, being able to play c6 and remove this knight from this diagonal. And yes, the knight on d4 looks pretty as well, but the knight on d4 isn't really the main point. The main point is we stunt this bishop and block this knight from the b5 square. Because black has achieved this, black should have seriously no issues for kind of the rest of this game. Now I want you to contrast what happened in the game if Ding Liren had played the move knight b5 here. Now obviously, I can't say for certain how the game would have continued, but if you imagine that the game continues along similar lines, for example, now the move knight d4 isn't really on the cards because we've defended that square quite adequately. So a move like queen d7, trying to activate the bishops. Then just for example, a move like queen c2, applying more pressure to c7, further discouraging the move knight d4 and defending this diagonal just a bit. Then maybe a move like bishop h3, move like rook fd1, captures, and then a simple move like rook a to d8. Now, all of a sudden, out of nowhere, white's positional threat can sort of break through. And that threat is, yes, there was one powerful bishop. Black has managed to neutralize that with his play. But don't forget, there's actually a second very, very powerful bishop in the position for white, and that threat is to play the move d4. If white can achieve the move d4 without too much controversy, then white should significantly, I believe, be better in this position. In some specific cases, if black had played, for example, even a bit worse, played a sort of nonchalant move like, I don't know, let's just say he wastes some time, rook d8, rook d1, and I don't know, king h8. Now all of a sudden moves like e4 also potentially become playable, and then d4 even becomes stronger with the fact that these center pawns are now sort of rolling up the board. So positional threats for white, definitely the move d4 is #1 priority for white. The reason being, you absolutely want to open up this second bishop, and you want to prevent moves like knight d4 kind of by occupying that square yourself, taking that space for yourself before your opponent can sort of get there. So positional idea for black, definitely this move knight d4. Positional idea for white, playing d4 himself, or e4 d4, or occasionally e3 d4, as Manny even suggested. So keep those ideas in mind if you find yourself in these sorts of positions. This is kind of one of the most common ways that you'll see players playing against the English. Not necessarily this exact position, but setups like this for black with this sort of imbalance with the knight wanting to come to d4 and white trying to control the long diagonal like this. These are the really key ideas to know here. But okay, in the game, h3 was played by Ding Liren, and I really do think that this move was a critical mistake because it allowed black too much time to get the setup that he wanted. Queen d7 with tempo, king h2, and now knight d4. And now the worst is definitely past for Magnus, and I do believe black just has a very, very comfortable position. Knight d2, c6, and then Ding goes for this move e3. Already there's some potential tactical ideas of taking on d3, giving up 2 pieces for the rook and a couple pawns, but Magnus wasn't having it, plays the move knight b5 instead. Knight takes b5, c takes b5, and now while it's true that the diagonal has kind of been opened up, the removal of the c6 knight very much works in black's favor rather than white here. And white didn't get to play this for free. He had to commit to the move e3, and because now he's committed to the move e3, this pawn on d3 is going to be a significant weakness. In fact, because this pawn on d3 is so weak, we'll see Ding Liren actually give up kind of his entire queen side just in an attempt to maintain this pawn. Knight f3 was played in the game, trying to defend the d4 square, also supporting this pawn from behind. Rook a d8 now, and once again Ding has to make a concession here, plays the move e4. This is sort of the only way to really keep this d-pawn from dropping off the board. Bishop e6 was Magnus Carlsen's choice. Now this is kind of a pawn sacrifice on e5, but we'll see that it was just very well calculated by the world champion, and he does end up with a fairly significant advantage. In the game, Ding captured on e5 and ended up in some trouble. Can anybody guess the best move for white in this position? Can anybody see? Knight b5 is an idea to remember. It's not the most intuitive. So in this case, knight b5 was so strong because the move a5 has been played. And this actually happens quite a bit when the moves a5 or or a4 kind of appear on the board. Then that's when knight b5 and knight b4, respectively, can become very, very strong. Because normally a3 and a6 are just too comfortable for kicking away the knight, but once these pawns have sort of been committed, that's when these moves kind of gain in power. Why not d4 instead of e4? Knight d4, knight takes e5. So taking an e5 is actually what the world champion was hoping for, either with the knight or the bishop. Last chance for d4, so d4 is going to be correct here. I think d4 is the best try for white. The point being you just need to get rid of this weak pawn sort of at any cost. The game might continue knight takes e4, queen e2, knight back to g5, and then white is regaining this pawn on the e5 square. So d4 would have been nice, also would have been thematic. Once again, the point being we just need to open up this bishop. In the game, Ding Liren actually goes for bishop takes e5, and now after bishop takes e5, knight takes e5, queen d6. This is a simple fork, and the walls sort of come tumbling down for white here. f4 was a nice move to support this knight, but now queen takes a3, d4, bishop takes b3, and 3 queenside pawns are rolling very, very quickly, whereas white's center is not so easy to mobilize with the black rooks so well placed to kind of challenge their advance. and Liren kind of fell apart rather quickly in this position. Queen d3 is played, queen b4. Ding tries to push the d-pawn. This rook comes to c8, challenging the open file. Also, rook c8 was a bit of a trap, actually, by Magnus Carlsen. It very much is daring white to play d6, threatening to fork these rooks, and Ding kind of accepted the bait. But now, only one move wins for black, but it does, in fact, win, and Magnus finds it. We just played rook d to c8, and the winning move is, of course, to play rook c to d8, just challenging this pawn once again. And now there's simply no way to defend this pawn. The d1 square is covered, d7 isn't enough, knight takes d7, played in the game, knight takes d7, and now bishop c4 is just devastating. Nowhere to put this queen. Queen d1, this is hanging, this is hanging, this is hanging. It's just a lost position. Queen d1, queen e7, and Liren threw in the towel here, went ahead and just resigned. So we saw that game sort of turn very, very, very quickly into Magnus Carlsen's favor. And the reason is that early middle game, that one slight misstep with h3 sort of was the first domino in the series of mistakes that led to Magnus winning this game. I do think h3 in this position is more or less the culprit for Magnus Carlsen winning this game. And it goes to show you how dangerous these kind of innocuous-looking positions actually can be. Just because neither side is getting checkmated immediately doesn't mean that there isn't a lot at stake. In fact, I would go as far as to say that this position is terrifying to me, because if you waste just a little bit too much time, all of a sudden you are going to be in a world of suffering for a long, long time. One last positional note on this. After knight d4, you might be wondering, why knight d2, allowing black the time to play the move c6? Why not take on d4, take on d4? And the reason is, this structure is also just going to be very, very advantageous to black. If black can manage to get this half-open e-file with this rook bearing down on this e2 pawn, white is once again going to be suffering in this position. Just for example, a move like knight a4. And then, I don't know, I guess this is sort of a problem, but not really, because we're threatening this. Yeah, I don't know. A move like bishop e6 even, and life is going to be good for black here. Ideas of bishop d5, ideas of rook b8 if you dare to capture this guy. If you play a move like knight c5, you can just take and queen d6. And the queen side is very, very mobile for black. This is just a good structure for black in general. Okay, so one last note on that game. So e4 was the turning point. I would go as far as to say that h3 was the turning point, because after h3, knight d4 became unstoppable for black, and if black achieves knight d4, then black is doing very, very well in these positions. Even if, objectively the computer says it's not that bad for white, practically, once knight d4 comes on the board, white is very, very much on the back foot. And we saw here, I believe that bishop takes e5 was the point where Magnus actually did get a very serious advantage. If white had found the move d4 here, I think white is still doing okay. Okay, we have 7 minutes left. Why don't we take a look at one more game? Hopefully, I will move quickly in this one. This is another game of Liren against Magnus Carlsen. We had d4 and a King's Indian from the world champion. As I take a sip, knight f3, castles, h3 is the fashionable thing to do these days with the white pieces against the King's Indian. The idea of h3 is sort of multifold. In some of the more positional lines, you'll see black trying to trade off this bishop for one of the light pieces for white. Now, this won't happen in your more traditional King's Indian, where this bishop is really important, but in some lines, you'll see white go for a more Benoni type, or black go for a more Benoni type setup, and that's when you would kind of see those ideas coming into play. So it guards the g4 square against that, it guards the g4 square against any annoying knight g4s if this bishop comes to e3, but perhaps most importantly, it guards the g4 square so that white could potentially put a pawn there. And the idea of this is, of course, one of the main breaks in the King's Indian for black is always, e5, f5, challenging the center, and g4 is a very nice deterrent of f5. So h3, this is the thing to do these days. Are the semis over yet? I believe Anish Giri and Jan Nepomniachtchi still have more to go in their battle. They are tied 1-1 in the mini-matches. Magnus has defeated Ding Liren to move on to the finals. e5 played in the game. d5, knight a6 was the world champion's choice. The point being, you just want to get this knight to the c5 square. And now bishop g5 is a kind of annoying move by Ding Liren. The huge downside of playing the move h3 is that you very much weaken the f4 square. You're kind of limiting your potential to play the move g3. So bishop g5 is a nice way to compensate for that by making this knight slightly more immobile. Bishop d7 was played in the game by Magnus. Knight back to d2 now is freeing up this f-pawn for anything it might want to do. Might want to come to f3, might not want to move at all. Maybe we just want some access for our queen to these kinds of squares. c6, played in the game, is challenging the center ever so slightly for black. Bishop e2, queen b6, rook over to b1. King h8 now was played by Magnus, and I think this is because Magnus was running a little bit short on ideas. This queen, I feel like, doesn't really belong on this b6 square. I think this is actually a little bit of a misstep, walking into things like a potential c5 with tempo, a potential knight c4 with tempo, potential b4 c5 with tempo. But oh well, king h8, castles, and now c5 played by Magnus. And this was, I think, in direct response to some threats involving c5 and knight c5 with tempo, or knight c4 with tempo for white. a3, queen d8, b4, b6, knight b5 was played in the game. Queen e7 now, forced to defend the e-pawn, or the d-pawn, and I'm not going to lie to you, this is kind of just an awful, awful, awful position for black out of the opening. Ding Liren definitely outplayed Magnus in the opening here. But the point of the game I'm arriving at shortly comes a little bit later. Bishop d3, queen f8, knight f1, knight h5, knight e3, bishop f6. Magnus comes up with this maneuver because he just wants to trade off his bad piece. In general, of course, he wants to trade pieces because he has less space, but he makes sure that those trades aren't unfavorable for him, getting rid of this bishop, which was staring at nothing but pawns, for white's active bishop. We have takes, knight c3, queen back out to e7, bishop c2 now, and we even see the move knight b8 by Magnus, trying desperately to get this knight back into the game. Queen d2 was played by Ding Liren, king g7, and now we see Ding sort of give Magnus his shot to get back into the game. So I'm going to ask you two questions. Question number one, the move king h2 was played in the game. Find the shot for Magnus to give your pieces life. Once again, we don't care about material. We care about having, squares for our pieces, having active pieces. So black to move and free his pieces, even at the expense of some material. What can you do with black here? All right, I don't have a ton of time, so if you do want to find it for yourself, go ahead and pause the video here. If not, the solution, of course, is you want to take on b4, a takes b4, and play the move a5. And what's the point of all this? One, we are opening up this c-file for our rook. More importantly, two, we are getting rid of the final defenders of the c5 square. And once those defenders are gone, we're back, baby, coming back into the c5 square. Our knight has a square, and we are back in the game. Rook a1, played in the game, is threatening to win this pawn. So, of course, Magnus Carlsen grovels and plays the move bishop e8, saying, please don't take my pawn. But that's a joke, of course. Of course, he just sacrifices this a-pawn. Because who cares about the a-pawn? We got the c5 square for our knight. That's all we wanted. That's all we wanted. So ba5, ba5, rook a5, knight c5. And now, all of a sudden, the horrible, horrible position that black used to have is now actually not the most uncomfortable position I've ever seen in my life. I think in general, you might prefer to be white here just because of the extra pawns still, but honestly, practically, it's easier to find moves for the black pieces here. There's open files, your knights are on good squares, you have targets on e4 and c4, and the moves sort of just flow naturally. And this is another case, as we saw in game 1, of Magnus using these active pieces to just outplay his opponent despite being material down. So that's how black managed to break free. As for what white could have done about it, I do think that the computer suggestion here of b5 is actually correct. Now you have to be wary in these kinds of positions. Sometimes the computer will suggest a move like b5 and it totally locks down the entire queenside, which is not what you want. The computer's kind of just wrong about these positions. It's one of the few things that it's often wrong about. You want the ability to open at least one file on the queen's side. You don't want it totally locked down, but b5 doesn't do that. And the reason is, if the move a5 comes on the board, first of all, knight a4 is going to be good enough, just totally decimating this b pawn, but also ba6 is going to be a very comfortable edge now for white. The reason being, even though we're not up a pawn here, and we still are activating some of the black pieces, this pawn still remains on c5, and we have a target on b6. So I think b5 would have been great, with the idea to follow that if black continues kind of shuffling, well, the move a5 is going to become strong eventually. Even if not straight away, we can definitely prepare this move with moves like rook a1, moving the knight on c3. But this idea of a5 and a takes b6 is, I think, going to be a strong one. So very quickly, let's see how the game wrapped up. That's how I think Ding could have improved and kept the advantage. We saw Magnus slowly making threats on the king side, keeping an eye on the queen side as well. The queen came back to g5, all the way back to the queen side. Ding starts pushing this f-pawn, which we'll see kind of comes back to bite him. He ends up lacking a bit in king safety. This pawn comes to g4, the king side closes up a bit, and now with the king side closed, both players turn their total attention over to the queen side. Knight b5 perhaps was a pretty important mistake by Ding. Now, with this pawn being drawn to the b5 square, his king is actually a little bit too weak, with pressure along this fourth rank coming to him. We had bishop takes b5, cb5, queen a4, and now you do see this pressure starting to mount on the e4 pawn. Ding tried repeating for a bit, and eventually we ended up in this position, where the only move for Ding to actually maintain equality is the strange-looking knight to d1, just stepping off the f2 square, so you could meet rook b3 with a move like rook a1. The point being this queen is overloaded, but in the game, Ding chose the move queen b3, which is, of course, just immediately tactically losing on the spot. So black to move and win if you want to try to find it. If not, of course, the move is rook c1, and the point is this rook is simply overworked. And after rook c1, Ding Liren went ahead and resigned this position. And so with this, Magnus goes on to win the semifinal match against Ding, taking out Fabiano Caruana in the quarterfinals, taking out Ding Liren in the semifinals, moving on to play the finals either against Anish Giri, who he's been having some fun trash talk with, or Jan Nepomniachtchi, who is one of the frontrunners in the candidates to challenge him for the World Championship title. Should be an exciting finale to the tournament. Hopefully you guys enjoyed these games of Magnus Carlsen. I think they really show how he is still the, sort of #1 player in the world, outplaying the #2 and 3 players very convincingly in both of these matches. That is it for the Road to 2000 tonight. If you're watching live, be sure to stay tuned. We've got the end game class coming up right after this. If you're watching the video, that is all for me tonight. Thank you so much for joining me. My name is Caleb Denby, and I will see you next time.